The Speaking of Cults podcast is presented solely for general informational, educational, and entertainment purposes. The use of information on this podcast or materials linked from it is at the user's own risk. The views, information, or opinions expressed by the host and guests are solely those of the individuals involved and do not constitute medical or other professional advice. Hello and welcome to the Speaking of Cults podcast. I'm Chris Shelton, your host. This week, and we're going to get right into it, we are going to be discussing Landmark Forum, the Landmark education thing, this group called, otherwise sort of categorized as large group awareness training. And this is where you're dealing with a bunch of people at once sort of thing. And we're going to talk about the details of this. I am joined this week by Ann L. Peterson, author of a new book called Is This a Cult?, where she explains and discusses at some length her experience working for the Landmark Group or this organization. And I got to tell you, it's a great read. It's a fast read. It's a very interesting read. And the parallels between her experiences and mine as a high-level Scientologist and Sea Org member are shockingly parallel in so many ways that I was happy to have her on the show here to discuss this. And welcome to my show.
Thank you. I know I'm so excited actually to see you're the first real Scientologist that I've gotten to speak to and compare notes. Mostly because I was always scared to have any of those conversations. And you know, when you're working for Landmark, you don't have time anyway. You know, you can't really you can't look at anything else. But we're so not that, you know, why would you ever talk to those people? Like, what would that do? So anyway, so I'm excited I have questions too.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
My own experience and really digging into the history of the, Werner Earhardt, the Est organization, which was the predecessor to Landmark, and and then of course Landmark. So I'm kind of going back through the history and learning. So I'm excited to talk to somebody who was on the other side of the Scientology wars.
Absolutely.
There's a whole drama in the 90s between the Scientology, L. Ron Hubbard and Werner.
Yes. In fact, it goes back to the 70s, at least from my knowledge of this. And it's limited. I'm not as familiar with or, down the rabbit hole on Landmark as I am, of course, with Scientology. I've seen and had sent to me their training materials, and we've had discussions about this on my Sensibly Speaking podcast a few years ago with a woman who worked in Perth, Australia, behind the scenes for many, many years. Yes. And
with her yesterday.
Oh, great. Okay, cool. So there's,
she's trying to get the Leaving Landmark show going.
Excellent. Good. Because I'm finding the more I learn about this, and certainly from your book, the more I see not just parallels in behavior. I want to emphasize right from the get-go here that there are language similarities or samenesses here in referring to Landmark as the technology, in referring to being, what was the expression they used, at choice, which is sort of a similar phrase in Landmark, I suppose, to how Scientology uses the term at cause. We're going to get you at cause, in the driver's seat of your life, this kind of thing. Does these things sound familiar to you?
Yeah, well, right in the Landmark Forum, you get which is the introductory, the first program of Landmark's programs, and there's a whole section about choice itself, vanilla chocolate choose. And, there's some discussion about what the real thing they're after with that distinction is. But fundamentally, you're sort of left with either choose what you have, choose, vanilla chocolate choose. Okay, now chocolate choose. And, the idea being that in choosing what you have or life as it is, you have freedom to then move, I guess. So that's my understanding of it. As I recall, it's been a while, I have to say. And then they have also, though, the whole responsibility distinction, which is the at cause, the willingness to be at cause. And which I have found in every organization as I've been deconstructing. So I've had lots of conversations with Sarah and Nippy, about Nexium.
Yep.
And reading through all of these sort of human potential, early self-help founders, which is sort of how I think of the L. Ron Hubbard, Werner guys. Keith came along and tried to like cash in, later, but
that's right.
But they all have some version of at cause as one of the primary distinctions.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, and that's even morphed now, as I understand, it's kind of morphed into the whole, like, you are your intentions. What you intend is what you will get kind of thing. That's the modern version.
Yes.
It's a similar concept.
Yes, it's very tied in with this earlier and very, very old idea. Goes back centuries, even millennia, to the secret, the idea that what you put out is what you get back, and that there's this sort of flowy energy nature to our lives and our relationship with the universe around us, where our thoughts and our spiritual beliefs or ideas are what we manifest in our lives. And you can bring that concept down to a more scientific sounding or more sort of grounded idea when you start redefining terms like cause or choice or responsibility. And this was a key thing in Scientology early on, 1951, that Hubbard used to sort of compromise people's understanding of their own ability to navigate their lives by putting them in this false position that every single thing that ever happened to them was kind of their fault, right? It was kind of their responsibility. Yeah. Is that paralleled in what your experience?
Here's this isn't exactly the definition. It's a Werner quote, but it captures the world of responsibility as sort of defined and used in Landmark. And it says, responsibility begins with the willingness to take the stand that one is cause in the matter of one's life. It's a declaration, not an assertion. That is, it is a context from which one chooses to live. Context is a huge thing in the Werner Landmark world. It's a grace you give yourself, an empowering context that leaves you with a say in the matter of life. Which, from what I understood, and I've done, I study with the Ridwan School now, which is a spiritual school. And my favorite thing about them is they pull from everything. So you kind of get a little taste of all kinds of traditions, and they don't relate to any of it like the truth. There's nothing to follow, join, or adhere to. It's great. It's really a study path. And this idea of responsibility as a kind of spiritual context that we can create, there's some freedom in that. I mean, that's what I found when, as a teen mom, I started my adult life as a teen mom and lived on my own since I was 16. And I could have easily been the victim of all that. And so some of these ideas like provided some power, but they also get weaponized.
Right.
So that's what happens in Landmark, right? So you get exposed to it in the course. Most people's reaction to the initial exposure, which is this whole idea that you have some dominion, you have some autonomy in your life, powerful idea. And but then it gets turned. So as you get more and more in the organization and leadership roles, you start to have some accountability, which is another word they twist all up into all kinds of things. But it gets used against you. You didn't make your targets. So, what are you not being responsible for in your life? What bills did you not pay? What argument did you get in with and they get deeply, deeply invasive in your life.
Right.
And the more you go in the organization, I mean, what folks have to go through to become a forum leader, which is kind of like the top level leaders in Landmark, right? The people who lead the forum, they're down to what's in your drawers, what's in your thoughts, what's in, because they start to go into this kind of weirdo idea that what you're thinking, what you're doing, any place where your integrity's out is the source of why there's not registrations. Forget about that. There's no lead generation machine. There's no, like anything a normal business would do. to do that, it isn't there. So, I mean, your lead generation machine is the other graduates. So as soon as you do the forum, you're a commodity in that environment.
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it. It's in Scientology, responsibility has a few definitions, one of which is knowing and willing cause over matter, energy, space, time, life, and form. This idea that you are, and which is paralleled by what you were saying there in terms of this like knowing, willing, choice that you're making. Another definition that I'm recalling right now, not verbatim, because it's kind of long and it's a little convoluted, but it's the non-recognition and denial of the right of intervention between oneself and any object, person, matter, energy, space, time, and the assumption of full right of determination over it. So you're right. It's kind of convoluted, right? You're not going to let anybody else get between you and this thing. You're the one who's completely and knowingly determining the, motion, direction, whatever it is of this person, place, thing, idea, etc. That's being responsible. And this, we could go around and around on that for an hour alone, but I wanted to make the point here that all throughout your book, you made the wonderful choice of italicizing all of the loaded language. That's what this is called, is you load the language. You take these words and you give them new ideas or definitions. And as you just I could not agree with you more. You take these empowering concepts and they become utilized to oppress a person, to make less of that person. Oh, you're being responsible. Oh, but this didn't happen. Therefore, you're at fault because you aren't somehow summoning more responsibility. And it must be because of the skeletons in your closet that are holding you back. So we have to now get you to confess or something. I was curious, is there a confession component in this whole experience? Do you have to sit down and write down or somehow confess to things?
Well, I think there's something, yes and no. So I think, and Rick Allen Ross said this great thing to me when I started talking with him, which was like talking to the devil, right? So, I mean, it literally was shaking the first time I called him. Yeah. And it turns out he's very lovely, very intelligent, very cogent, very generous man. And, but so Landmark is kind of considered sort of Scientology light. It's my understanding from some different things I've read in Steve Pressman's book, Outrageous Betrayal and whatnot, that Werner was involved in Scientology and made it up through whatever the top level of auditor is. And I have been told by an ex-staff member that, I don't know if it's still there, but there are the metal tube things.
Oh, the cans. The e-meter.
There's an e-meter at World Headquarters. And
there is?
That's what I've been told. Since I wrote my book, Chris, I have to tell you, life before the book and life after the book are very different. So the day I published the book, and as you get to the end of it, you'll see where I get to and my understanding and my answer to the question is Landmark a cult and all that stuff. And I think the first page of my next book, if I write it, might be something like, it took me less than a week to realize I was wrong. It is a cult. And I'll say more about that, certainly on the inside, right? Yeah. Like that it's got a little bit more than just some cultish practices. It just depends what level you're participating in and where. Yeah. So anyway, it's all this stuff is light. And what Landmark did, Rick says that Werner is one of the most shrewd of the human potential cultish guru characters that he's encountered in his career. Given his experience, that's saying a lot, right? This is one of the cult leader expert guys. And I work closely with Werner. Werner is very smart. He's very shrewd. And I think that Werner somewhere, this is my supposition, my opinion, decided the way forward was to be a business. So Scientology kind of went the religious route. Yep. Seems like mostly for the tax benefit. So
and First Amendment protections under the law, both of those.
Exactly. Well, and the worshipness. I mean, it's more culty in that, right?
Yep.
So
Yep.
cultish aspect to all religions, right? Is they
Yep.
put that deity in place. But Werner wanted to be, his vision was to have a seminar company, to have a company, to be in the business environment. So to be in the business environment, even if it's a personal business, like, you're the customer, they have a whole division that is about doing that work, ontologically based leadership development in organizations. That's a whole aspect of Landmark. But the primary thing people interact with when they think of Landmark is the Centers Division, which is a seminar company. It's a personal and professional development company. Mm-hmm. And so I think that, and the pressures to be successful in the marketplace as that, has had Landmark keep itself fairly clean in certain ways. You couldn't commoditize, you couldn't sell in that environment. They wanted to be very homogeneous, very respectable, very normal. I was in a meeting one time where there was a conversation about infiltrating, the world with transformation and creating a, transform world that they kind of stole from the Bucky Fuller idea, a world that works for everyone with no one and nothing left out. That's kind of been in the background. Almost all senior program leaders, staff, people that get deeply involved, that's the why for them. It's why they're there. They're going to take this unique, I'm making quote marks for those
air quotes, yep.
Unique, not unique, a set of ideas. They did package them in unique ways. Some are very effective, actually. I mean, it's anybody you'll hear, and you probably have, when you talk to people who've done Landmark programs, they loved it. They were great. Mm-hmm. I share that in my book. And, make it so ubiquitous and so normal that it could infect everywhere and everything.
Yes, it's a very... If I were going to reimagine Scientology as a secular activity, it would look and sound an awful lot like what I see and hear from Landmark. In many, many ways. The thing that Scientology provides that is harder to see or discern in Landmark is this idea of a bridge to total freedom, this idea that you're going to climb these spiritual levels of enlightenment and become this super-powered super being. But it seems that Landmark has its own path towards that goal, or towards that enlightened, super-powered person that's arrived through more non-spiritual, more secular kind of thinking. Would that be accurate from your experience?
I think that's dead on. I think that and as I'm now studying it more deeply, and I'm seeing more of the background, Werner did some work with some Buddhists, in a Buddhism community and whatnot. And, he took, and he still does. I mean, when I was working with him, he has the whole team of people that's reading books for him and giving synopsises. He's meeting with academics of, new thought. It's very into neuroscience these days. Like he's, I think at his core somewhere, he just loves to study and learn, honestly. And, but then that gets consumed by the egoic aim to be, recycle it and make it mine.
There it is.
And then he consumes it. I mean, he consumes money at a rate that's like, hard to imagine. Like it's just, he's got to have a constant source of a lot of money to fund his particular lifestyle and idiosyncrasies and so on. But he very much, I think, took like some of the Buddhist ideas. Like one of the big things that used to be said, the Landmark Forum, one of the aims of the forum, and now that I'm reading the early essays, I can see it there, was to leave you at empty and meaningless. That life is empty and meaningless, and it's empty and meaningless, that it's empty and meaningless. If you get that, you really got the forum. Like you got it. Remember the jokes, the est? You got it. That's what you were getting.
Yes.
You were getting to nothing. And just yesterday, I was reading from a 1976, I'm going to send it to you as soon as I can get my hands on it, this newsletter that Werner wrote that explains all this. But I think that he really was reaching for that kind of enlightenment stage where you are all of it and none of it, and that's, I've done enough spiritual training now. I understand the distinctions a lot better than how I was trained in them at Landmark. So, but the idea that I am all of it. I am everything and nothing, that I am boundless, that I am, all that is. I think he was looking to find a process, a replicatable, scalable process to give people into that idea. And then you fill it with, and then in that space of nothing, you create something.
Right.
And then you are your creation. I mean, that's really...
That is so Scientological. It's fascinating to me. Because the bottom line with Scientology is that you are a nothingness that is a somethingness. You are this word Thetan. You are the spiritual entity. And that is, and everything you just said describes that. Mm-hmm. That all of life comes down to a nothing that is everything, is potentially everything, is responsible for everything, is knowing and willing cause over everything. And Hubbard is clear in his writings, his original writings on responsibility. And I don't know exactly where he drew this from, certainly not Werner, because this is 1951 I'm talking about. But he wrote about this concept of you're responsible for everything that happens in the world, including, some guy getting shot on a battlefield in a country you've never been in a war you don't even, have nothing to do with. You're somehow connected to and have responsibility for that. And at another level, all of us collectively together are intending or creating this entire universe and everything in it, right?
I'm one of those people I'm a lifelong learner, and I'm a sort of like believe in everything and nothing kind of gal at this stage. I'm 55 at this stage. Why not? I'll turn that rock over and investigate a little bit. And, if I find something interesting or valuable, I might try it on for a while. But I don't particularly adhere to any deep set. But that's, the butterfly flaps its wings, right? I mean, I don't, any self-development seminar, group, spiritual, secular, that I've encountered, all have some version of these ideas that they've taken, sort of ancient ideas that they've taken and tried to package and commodify and in some way. And and mostly it's for, money and power, in service of money and power. So that, and it's been corrupted. What I feel is sad is it sort of corrupted a lot of the kind of magic of some of those ideas. And, but it's also put a burden on us as human beings that frankly, we're not equipped to handle, in my view. We're not equipped. So I just recently reread Codependent No More.
Pray tell. Like, please go on.
How'd she know about me?
Right.
Because I hear that responsibility thing, and I feel in one way liberated. Like, okay, I'm not locked into the destiny of somebody who had to drop out of high school in the 9th grade and had a son and was a single mother and came from a background of no money and blah, 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 the circumstances that made up my life. I'm not bound by that. Okay, so that's a freedom, and it's great. But I am bound in turn by my drug addicted alcoholic ex-husband. I'm somehow causing the matter of that. Anything, everything that my kids do and don't do and become and don't become, I'm somehow a source of that. And I'm constantly analyzing myself and digging into myself, and I'm working on myself in order to try to impact things that frankly, not only are maybe not even any of my business, are definitely not things that I can change. And, quite honestly, I had quite an awakening of this when my daughter, who, I know you haven't finished the book, but you'll learn that my daughter has complex PTSD from a number of things that happened in her, her relationship with her dad. I didn't do them, but one kind of I did. And she was sexually harmed at a very early age. And so she has, she has complex PTSD. So walking with her in her 20s, I really had to learn I wasn't responsible. I had to surrender my daughter's life to my daughter. And when I did that is when she started to move away from being suicidal and move towards owning her own herself. And it took me giving up this idea that I am responsible, the cause and the matter, source of everything and all of it, everywhere, all the time.
Right.
And because so it's a double-edged sword, right? There's a certain amount of freedom, but there's also a lot of danger. I look over in what's happening. One of those people, very aware of the world. I'm a world citizen in my view. And, I see what's going on in Ukraine and what's happening in Gaza and Israel. And, and if I'm here going, okay, here I am in my little Plano, Texas house and I'm causing the matter, well, I better get busy because there's some problems.
Exactly. And it's that sort of double-binded thinking that the leadership of these groups is responsible for, because it's not just about empowerment. It's not just about sharing ideas that make you feel like, oh, I can get in the driver's seat in my life. I can be in charge of a few things. That's a positive, healthy view to have, I believe, for anybody is, guess what? It's your life. Run it. Grab the reins, right? There's nothing wrong with that. And I think that's at the opening gates of all of these groups for a reason, right? Because it makes you feel really good. It gives you a euphoric feeling even. And it lasts. And you go, wow, look at all these ways I can line up my life, and you start getting things in order. And I mean, this even gets down to, the sort of Jordan Peterson ridiculousness. You clean your room, Well, you're taking charge of something, and that feels empowering, and that makes a person feel really good about themselves when they're living a life of abuse or trauma or problems and issues, and they don't know how to navigate it or deal with it. And people can feel pretty helpless in this world for lots and lots of reasons. Right. So that's a really great thing. But then, see, that's not the bad part.
That's the beginning. That's the opening. That's what brings you in. I love Sarah and Nippy of A Little Bit Culty and The Vow, NXIVM whistleblowers. They talk all the time, like Vicente says, nobody joins a cult.
Yep.
And, it doesn't start out. That's not what you're doing. You're here, you're learning, you're growing and developing, you're taking power in your own life. And it feels really, really, really good.
That's right.
And there's some problems there. There's only been a few studies done on LGATs, which Landmark's programs are in the LGAT, Large Group Awareness Training Forum.
Yep.
And they've taken some stuff out. Dr. John Hunter is the best I've heard talking about LGATs in a really great way. But there is a whole thing. One of the few studies that was done on LGATs, which I understand Werner actually participated in, but it shows that the result lasts on average 7 to 10 days.
So
the euphoric emotional high itself lasts 7 to 10 days. But here's the thing, but the brain hangs on to that. The brain is not going to remember, all the pain, all the exhausting hours, the mind-numbing drone of garbledly, gooky sounding information that you're flooded in for hours and hours and hours. And you're not going to remember that by the end of it, you've been flooded with dopamine. You've been taken to very low lows and brought to very high highs for 3 days and an evening. You can't ever forget the evening, because the evening's all for Landmark and recruitment. So that's the forum, is 3 days and an evening. But all of this, but by the end, you have this sort of explosive experience, and you're like, and you will hear it. I hear it from people all the time. I mean, I was a senior program leader in Landmark. My whole network is basically Landmarkians, as my daughter calls us. And Landmark changed my life. I'm actually on a war against Landmark changed my life. You can't even, somebody says that around me now. I'm like, no, you changed your life, and you used some tools from Landmark to do it.
That's right.
What other tools did you use?
That's right.
My internet just went. But they very deliberately supplant your autonomy, your sort of ownership of the result with their work. Why? Because that's how you get guests to come. That's how LGATs work.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a bunch of things that are very dangerous about LGATs, but that's a big, whole kind of explosive experience. And it's, Landmark calls it transformation.
Yes, that's a big key word for them, transformation. I want to ask you some questions about this because we could compare and contrast all day, and there's endless numbers of comparisons. Let me say this real fast, and then I have a question for you. I'm told by somebody who's done many, many, many cult interventions on the order of Rick that. And for as long that in the 70s in the 80s when they were sort of intervening with some people who had been involved in Est or Landmark or the Forum, that in the 70s when this thing was first getting going, it was so blatantly ripping off groups like Scientology that at the weekend seminars, the Est seminars, they actually had the Scientology dictionary there to define the terms Werner was using, like cause and responsibility and things like that. It was that blatant of a thing. And then over the years, especially I think it was in the late 70s, early 80s, once the real friction started between those groups, that I think Werner really started honing, okay, let's change this language so that it's not so obviously Scientology, even though if you have a background in Scientology like I do, I look at your work and I go, oh yeah, this is Scientology rewritten,
Well, and as a Landmark person, I would look at Scientology and go, oh, they ripped off Werner.
Right.
We're kind of told.
That's right.
Like, and anything else you hear, you go out in the world and you hear somebody talking about, oh, cause. I'm like, are you a graduate? That's the term for Landmark. You're a graduate. You must be a graduate. And it's very startling when you start to find out that there's all these people that know this stuff that are not graduates.
Yeah, exactly.
Because you were exposed to it there. So you think that's where it came from.
That's right.
And it's my understanding from, so far, the most intelligent, comprehensive thing I've read on the history is Stephen Pressman's outrageous betrayal, which the rumor is the Scientologists fed him all the information and whatnot. And, to that, I just say it's still the information. I mean, most of his source stuff is out of legal cases, some of it is other news articles and so on, but it's pretty dang well sourced. If you're an actual critical thinker, it's like, but for me, it was familiar. Right. There wasn't anything that was said in there, even though I did not participate until it was 95, 96 when I did the forum, I think. And, and as I progressed through my trajectory that did end up in 9 years working, closely with Werner Earhardt himself in a kind of revival, nothing that was said in there was even a stretch to believe. Like wasn't difficult at all. And at one point, what Stephen says in his accounting is that Werner took from Scientology quite heavily, mind dynamics. So that was his first jump, as I understand it, from encyclopedia, children's book salesperson, which was his early career. Another interesting corollary, I think, Keith Raniere had the whole consumer byline. Yeah. Werner was and so the MLM, the early versions of MLM.
Yep.
And then he starts, the guy who is a big Mind Dynamics guy, Mind Dynamics got kicked out of Australia or something. I mean, this is the way the story is told in this book is, so then he comes to San Francisco, meets Werner. They're all down on the, that one street in San Francisco where the Franklin house was Werner's house. But apparently the Scientology offices were right around the corner, like all the Enlightenment, human potential gang all hung out there together. I mean, they were together in that time coming out of Esalen in the late 60s. And so anyway, but the story goes that so Werner partners with this guy, I can't think of his name right now, but Mind Dynamics dude. And they're going to start doing seminars. And so they start doing, and he does Mind Dynamics seminars. And Charlene Aframo, who actually eventually comes back and heals heal old wounds, and she led the forum when I was around. But she's his Mind Dynamics trainer. And so then they formulate like Mind Dynamics of the US. Well, then Werner announces they start creating their own stuff. Then in a public room, 200 people in the room, Werner announces that he's going to start Werner Earhardt and Associates. And he basically breaks up with this guy in a public room.
Wow.
Says, no, we're no longer partners. I'm going to go this way. And he does that a few times. He, according to the lore, that is told mostly through this book. And then I've had now, since I published my book, I have a lot of people coming to me and telling me stories. Mostly they've been about Landmark, but now I'm starting to get some of the folks that were still around in those early days are coming in and having conversations and telling me some of the early stories. And it's all very consistent with what Stephen Pressman wrote.
I'll bet. But
yeah, Scientology, Heidegger. But he got the Heidegger stuff from Fernando Flores. So Fernando Flores was still alive, still doing programs actually in California. Fled whatever South American country he's from. He's a scholar in Heidegger, comes to San Francisco. Werner loves the academics. I think that's where he really wanted to be in some way. Like he really wants to be accepted in that kind of high academic realm.
Yeah.
No. But he, befriends Fernando. The story goes that he and Fernando start creating what becomes the Forum, which follows Est. And then he kind of like tells Fernando, like, nope, I'm going to do it on my own. Bye. And there's a, breakup there.
There seems to be some ego at play.
Just a little
bit. Yeah.
A little bit.
And that seems to be the combination of factors. When I actually step back and think about what L. Ron Hubbard did, how he started, how it rolled out, and then I go 25 years forward to Est and Werner Earhardt coming in and taking some of Scientology and some of this and some of that and doing his thing in a different venue, different model, but similar belief set or dogmatic set of truths. You realize that what you're dealing with are people who are trying to, and your use of the word commodification, right? This idea of, okay, how do I charge for this? How do I get people? How do I get rich off this? How do I live the life of Riley selling people these principles? Well, I got to spin it. I got to make it look like I've got my hand on the tail of a tiger that nobody's ever done before. This is powerful stuff. And I'm going to give you the secrets because I figured it out. And here they are, and you have to pay for them, and you have to go through this disciplined, rigorous process. There has to be some suffering. There has to be some sacrifice. There has to be some commitment to this, or you're really not getting it. And through that investment of our emotions, our finances, and our time and our energy, there's a sunk cost fallacy. There's I put all this into it. And I got to get something out of it. And they lead you down a path, whether it's through a Dianetic session or a Scientology belief set or a forum setting, that they get you to this headspace where you have an epiphany. You have wow, something's different about me right now. I feel more empowered. And that's actually not the end of the line. That's the beginning. That's how they get you, because it's not about trying to deliver something to you and have you go off and live your life now. It's about keeping you. It's about holding on to you. And that's what I wanted to ask you about. Is I'm curious how they do that with the forum situation. How do that you do your initial thing, but I'm guessing there's an awful lot of attention on re-sign, on getting the person to commit to do more.
Well, it's interesting. So somebody asked me, so the subtitle of my book is Confronting the Line Between Transformation and Exploitation.
Yeah.
They asked me once, like, okay, well, it was actually the person who introduced me to the forum. She goes, well, but did you ever feel exploited? And I was kind of like, there's something a little off about that question, but it took me a little bit. And what's off about it is if people feel exploited, they usually they walk away.
Yeah.
So exploitation doesn't quite work. I mean, sometimes we sort of agree, like we know, they're using our testimonial to sell their thing or whatever, and we agree to that. There's some consent. But right away at the end of the Landmark Forum, so it's Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So at the end, some leaders are more skillful with it than others. My forum leader, a fabulous human who I'm still very good friends with, and we've been deconstructing together, which has been hilarious. We laughed our way through our whole forum. He was just so funny. But at the end, we did kind of get this like, and if you want this feeling to continue and you want to now explore this new territory you've opened up, you need to have people in your life doing it with you. So you want to, and you've just had this incredible experience, and everybody you love, you want them to have that too. I mean, that's incredibly natural human thing, right? This day, if I find a great product, I'm going to tell everybody I know about it for a little while because I'm like, oh, this is so great, So you're already sort of feeling that way, but it's kind of weird. It's not it's not like a book. Oh, this is a great book, Chris. You got to check this out. It's like, no, come devote, almost 40 hours of your life, tear down all the walls, investigate, but then you'll see something really great and it'll just totally be worth it. Can't tell you how it works. Don't really understand it, but it's great. Come do it. But then they layer on, okay, now if you want this to continue, you got to have people in your life do it. So that's what Tuesday evening is about. So the Tuesday evening comes as a guest event. You bring your friends and family, and everybody shares about their life-changing transformations. And it used to be they took them off into a private room, the guests, and that was what I first lead as a beginning Landmark leader. That's the first thing you learn to lead it's called introductions to the Landmark Forum. And you lead these little guest sessions and you introduce the guests to the Landmark Forum. So right there, you're kind of being exploited for your network. And you can hear the MLME legacy in there.
Yep.
Then you go on to the advanced course. Well, the advanced course is about you've created the space in your life. So now you're going to invent yourself as a possibility, as a way of being. So Landmark's work is all very much based in ontology, and that's what it holds out, why it's different than other teachings, is because it's all
ontology.
About the study of being. So I think it's called the study and science of being somehow. But you go into the advanced course and you create, who I am is the possibility of courage and creativity. And now you're going to live your life from courage and creativity, and that's going to color all your actions and everything you're doing, and you're going to bring that to your relationships, this whole thing. Then you do the self-expression and leadership program. And there's about a 50%. Back in my day, my husband was a center manager, so I knew the statistics he left in 2001, I think, as a center manager. And I've talked to a lot of my friends are ex-center managers, so I think the stats have kind of maintained. So about 50% of the people who do the forum do the advanced course. And then like 30% of those go on and do the self-expression and leadership course. And the self-expression and leadership course, though, is now about actually changing your community, like making a difference in your community. And it's there's a whole project. I led this course. It was one of my, I led that, and I led the introduction, the leaders training program, the initial one. But see, now what's happening is you're getting indoctrinated you're going to change the world.
Mm-hmm.
Because another thing I've come to understand is a similarity between, I saw a piece, probably a Leah Remini piece or something recently on Scientology, and that's what current day Scientologists believe. They are changing the world. Keith Raniere's people, Sarah and Nippy, they were going to create an ethical world.
Mm-hmm.
Landmark, they're going to create a world that works for everyone with no one and nothing left out, which there's some cruel behind the scene jokes about that internally, some hypocrisy I've learned about recently that's just like, because they're going to do that while they're trying to make sure all their leaders basically are the most homogeneous, autonomous, 1990s business professional looking people. So they're constantly suppressing people who have an alternative lifestyle, people of color. Like there was a Navajo gal, they made her cut off her braids. They're like, because they're trying to make a world that works for everyone. And to me, it's very tied into the sort of patriarchal, sexist, racist, melee of the 70s, 80s, and 90s.
Yeah.
It's very much trying to perpetuate that, that whole worldview. And which is another reason why I think it's going to start to crumble, because that worldview is crumbling.
Right. That's right. Well, that's where we get the ego of the leader, and this group does have a leader. His name is Werner Earhardt. I mean, just like in Scientology, there's a leader. His name is L. Ron Hubbard, right?
Very hidden.
Yeah, very hidden, but it's there. And here's the way it's not hidden is exactly the way you just described, because it's the entire group, the culture of the group, if we will, and this is where the word cult comes from, by the way, right? Culture. The culture of the group is determined by the personality of the guy at the top and his vindictiveness, his attitudes, his cultural feelings, and what's appropriate, what's not, his sense of morality, right, wrong, good, bad. That's what permeates the culture through the materials and through the trainings and through the attitude that sort of flows from the top down as to what's acceptable and what's not. And you kind of learn that right away, like, oh, well, yeah, we want you to be a leader, definitely. We want you to climb the ladder, but not with those braids. Yeah, you're going to have,
It's so much more insidious in Landmark. I can't even, I mean, what I've learned in the last 8 weeks has really blown my mind. I mean, and I was involved, deeply. Although I went and I led in the centers, which is the main division, for a few years till like 2000. And then I went off and led in this kind of little bit rogue senior graduate division called the Wisdom Area. And the Wisdom Area had a very different approach, had a different leader, actually. A man to this day, he passed away a couple of years ago. I still admire him very much. And I feel very blessed to have found that track and not having stayed in the main track of Landmark. I liken it like this all the time. It's sort of like if Landmark was the United States, I went off to Kauai for 10 years. I went off to Kauai. And the programs I led were not so much based in intervention on people's thinking as on listening and listening for what was wanting. And I've now come to find out that much of it was based in auditing ideas. And but we called it consulting services. And so it's been very honestly quite upsetting. And there will be people, hopefully Landmark people, that will listen to this. And part of why I'm here is because they don't know the truth. They don't know what's really going on because it is so utterly well hidden.
Yep.
And and the lineage. So if you study the lineage, we go through those programs. It's exactly what you say. A Landmark forum leader, so they become a seminar leader first. And that's where the deep indoctrination really, 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 well, first it starts in the little introduction leaders training program, which I did lead that. But that's still mostly like learning to look people in the eye when you talk to them and, create possibility in interaction and, stuff like that. And you're doing that by learning how to introduce people to the forum. But then from there, you're going to go a couple tracks. Most people are guided through the seminar leader track. Seminars, with every forum, you get a 10-session seminar that's designed to help you integrate your learnings. And now it's part of their new membership model, which is, anyway, I have a whole thing against memberships, but that whole thing. So you get in there and you're going to become a seminar leader. And there's a man, Brian Nord, who was a centers division director, very high in the centers area. And started when he was 20, he's 46, and he left in November. And he read my book and he is talking. And so far they haven't shut him up. He's done 2 YouTube episodes where he's just ratting out the whole system.
Awesome.
But, you go into the seminar leader program and your first thing is to get that you are not who you think you are. You are not, and he shares a story about, being engaged with for many, many hours until he gets and he declares that who he is not a gay man. That is not who he is. So they literally work you over to empty out who you are until you're at nothing. And then, but you always fill nothing with something, right?
Yep.
So the something they fill it with is who you are, a seminar leader. If you are a staff member, if you go on staff, you go through a similar kind of indoctrination process. And there's goals, like NXIVM had the scarves. In Landmark, you have candidation, designation, you have these goals. And it's all backed up by the kind of name tag you wear. A friend of mine, we figured out that was the Landmark version of the scarves, and NXIVM is the name tags. So, because it's a big deal when you finally get the magnetic one. And then you get one that like says staff, like now, because see, to be a staff member, you have given your word, which that's a whole another common distinction in all these groups, integrity.
Yeah.
You have given word that who you are is the enterprise. Who you are is seminar leader. Who you are is forum leader. Right. And the forum leaders make a promise for life. And their families go through a whole kind of indoctrination thing too, where their family has to get that being forum leader will always come first. This is why they lose a lot of forum leaders, because that's unsustainable.
Right.
That's why in almost 50 years between S trainers and forum leaders, they've always had around 40, because at some point that's completely unsustainable, especially if you want to have a family.
Right.
So, but this thing about supplanting who you are, whatever ways you identify yourself in your identity structure, supplanting it with you are the enterprise, you are this leader, you are that, you are the distinction. I was declared designatable as wisdom course leader. How's this for some mind messery? I was declared designatable, which would be the highest state. That means that I've now practiced, engaged, learned, done, led, I think 44 wisdom courses to, however many. I knew the numbers at one time. I've forgotten it, several thousand people. And I've mastered that way of listening and thinking and those distinctions and ideas to the point that it is who I am. It's not what I do, it's who I am.
Right.
So that you're considered designatable. But in my case, it was declared that there was not enough designated wisdom course leader present to designate those of us that have been just declared designatable. So see how you're kept in this tension of reaching, but you're not. Half of these positions were unpaid. They're now paid. But they're being paid minimum wage and for about half the hours it actually takes to do the job, for much less.
Yep.
They finally got busted on the assisting program and ended it September 30th of 2022.
Oh, that's good to know at least. Yeah.
So, but this thing of like, that's why I say on the inside, when you get to the inside, it is a cult, because here's the one aspect of cult that they always defend themselves against. There is no worship of a leader.
Mm-hmm.
Except there is nothing. I've met Harry. In my experience, Harry is a good guy. The CEO,
mm-hmm.
He happens to be Werner's younger brother. The woman who runs the center's division, Joan, is his sister. And so when they say he turned it over to the employees, kind of.
Yeah, exactly. Well, plus who's getting where's all the money going? That's how you know who the leader really is.
Oh, well, that's a fun story too, because we just found out. I have a little Facebook group where people are talking, because I started talking. So now people are coming, and now Brian Nord's talking, and Dale, we found Dale. So Brian, Dale, and I have connected, and we're talking, and other people are starting to talk to each other, which has been completely taboo. I mean, I would say the Landmark community, especially the diaspora, the people who have left, are literally at the phase of, those disaster movies where they come out, the sun breaks after whatever the disaster was, and people start creeping out of their little hidey holes.
Right.
And they're looking around and they go, oh my God, I'm alive. I'm not alone. And what the heck happened? Yes. And that's where the Landmark community writ large is right now. The ex people. Right. And then there's a whole bunch that are defending the value of it and blah, blah, blah.
Right.
And, but those of us that are speaking up are getting barraged. And this is what I did not expect. I expected to be alienated, vilified, sued, all this stuff. I did not expect to hear from literally hundreds of people saying, oh my God, me too. Can I tell you my story? Which is why I know all this stuff now. Right. So one of the things about the money, so WE&A, Werner Earhardt and Associates, sold the liabilities and assets to Landmark. There was a little interim company called Transnational something or whatever. But anyway, ultimately sells it. This is in a legal case. A judge, there was a lawsuit, and this judge writes up this is where I got this information, right? Is for you lawyers out there listening. I'm happy to send you the file. So But he sells it for, see if I can remember right, it's like a $3 million payment. It has like its assets and liabilities equate out to like worth 9.7 million or something. He sells it for a $3 million, cash payment plus 2% of gross earnings plus 50% of net earnings pre-tax. That all, I don't know what, we were trying to do the math, but we figured that's somewhere around 60% of what Landmark is earning, right? For 18 years or $15 million, whatever comes first.
Huh.
And at the 18-year mark, the license, the right to Werner's ideas, the use of them reverts to Werner. I have not been able, there are people searching like crazy. We're trying to find out what happened in 2009. But I can promise you, Werner did not let his cash cow go.
No.
As somebody who became one of his mini cash cows, I promise you he did not let his cash cow go. So, but the frustrating part about that is what we were all told is that Werner was being trashed by Scientology, that there was like a death warrant out for him. I can't remember what the language was. I heard somebody recently about how L. Ron Hubbard would name certain people. There's the subversives, right?
Suppressives, yeah, and squirrels.
Squirrel. So he's a squirrel. And
that's right. Est was designated all the years and years and years ago as an official Scientology squirrel group. They have a list. And people have run off over the years, done some Scientology, done some Dianetics, and then went off and started their own thing and took some of those principles. And Hubbard, he was, destroy them, murder them, kill them, whatever you have to do. And of course, the term in Scientology is fair game them. They are now fair game. We can do anything we want to them. And
the wars,
yes,
designed.
That's right.
And it gets all fed out. But what we were told on the inside is that he left, and then of course the terrible 60 Minutes thing, and like run out of the country and And so to save the work, he gives it to the employees. And some people heard for $1. I don't ever personally hear, the story was that he turned it over to the employees. There was no questioning about the exchange and the money, but quite a few people are very mad because they were told it was $1 and it turns out it was $15 million.
A little different.
I'm fairly confident, I don't have the direct evidence, but it would not be surprising at all to find out that was only the beginning, because I think he also took consulting fees. Having hosted Werner and been kind of a financial apparatus for his operation, he does not pay for a single thing himself. Everything he needs and wants is paid for by some kind of external something. So my company, Innovative Event Management, for example, became the financier for this whole Being a Leader project that he wanted to relaunch, and put the ontological, phenomenological approach to leadership development. He was going to give it away free to the universities and colleges. That's the project I got involved in that brought me into his sphere. But in the 90s, the whole thing was he turned it over. Scientologists chased him out of the country, the IRS, all this stuff. And then the employees took it, and he kind of popped in from time to time to help out. But I would be shocked, and I've now talked to a few people that worked finances that speak of a lot of money being regularly transferred out of Landmark to Werner.
Yes.
And Landmark is a employee-owned. They'll tell you it's an employee-owned company. That's another whole shell game that I hope gets concealed. So it's technically owned by the employee shareholder option plan, but good luck finding an employee that even that even knows who's on the board of directors, let alone has any kind. If you ask any questions, you're out.
Yep.
Including I used to see financial statements. They don't give them anymore, and I'm out of the ESOP. I got cashed out in 2021, but that you would see, large amounts, $1 million, $2 million in fees. It was our understanding they were the licensing fees for the right to use his ideas. Which
Hubbard would do the same.
Selling to lots of different.
Hubbard would do the same thing. In fact, that's how they lost their tax exemption to start with, is Hubbard would go from church to church to church location and just raid the bank accounts, because he was always a signatory on the accounts, always, for every organization. And every organization was an independent corporate entity, but he was always the check signer or one of the check signers. And he always had undated, signed resignation letters from all the board members of all the corporations that would be under him. So if he wanted to, he could put a date on it, throw it out, you're resigned, and take control and put somebody else in who was going to do what he wanted. And this was how he ran things through the 50s and 60s until he formalized it even harder and realized that there were layers and layers of this. And so by the 80s, Scientology became a sort of impenetrable labyrinth of corporations and cutouts and various things that rely on other things. And it was all sort of figured out by high-powered tax attorneys and lawyers and stuff as to how to do this to manage one goal, which I believe you have described in what you just said, which is protect the founder so that he can get as much money as he wants, whenever he wants, however he wants. And that was kind of the setup,
Yes. Yeah, that's completely, my opinion at this point. Even the money that we raised, I was putting on a course featuring Werner and a group of colleagues, and they were all there, for slightly different reasons, but the main one was to develop this fabulous new kind of leadership development that they were giving away to universities. Except for then we find out that Werner sells a version of the material to one of the licensing companies for management consultants.
Right.
What was funny is I knew that they had a version of it, but it never occurred to me while I was in it that he would have sold that, because he would stand in front of the room all the time and say, we're receiving no remuneration. Well, that was true for everybody else on the team, but he was making money.
Of course.
Because he had a version to this other group that's inside of and part of a Landmark. And then, of course, I'm sure, and then he would have to go train them in how to lead it. So I'm sure he got fees for that as well. I mean, and then all of his expenses are paid, for our hosting. Part of why we set up the project that I set up was because they needed a way to cover the expenses to develop this body of work. And I was pretty clear about 5 years in that the different people around the table had slightly different not agendas, but intentions. Mike Jensen, really, I love Mike Jensen. We just lost him April 2nd of this year. He passed away. And, he was why I did the project, where I wasn't particularly enamored with Werner. It was definitely made me a cool kid in the community to be hosting for him. And that felt good, won't lie. But Mike was really a delight. This well-renowned Harvard professor of economics. Werner frequently, if you study his history, you'll see him frequently put himself on the coattails of high-level academics.
Yes.
Bucky Fuller, who's the atomic bomb guy. I can't believe I can't think of his name. It'll come. Menopause. Drives me crazy. Oh my God.
Oppenheimer? Are we talking about Oppenheimer?
Oppenheimer. Okay. Don't think of it for a minute, and I'll think of it.
Yeah.
And but lots of William Bartlett III. We can go on, and a few I won't name because they're trying to distance themselves, as they rightly should. And he would befriend these people, and I think part of it is a genuine. I've seen him. He and Mike love to debate ideas, and he loves that. I think that's a genuine aspect of his personality. But he was really seeking a kind of legitimacy, to be legitimized by the academic community. And then the idea is, if he's legitimized, then Landmark is legitimized. Right. You haven't got to probably part of my book yet where I tell about the stupid $4 million library in Fullerton, California. It's part of why I decided to write, because I'm like, okay, this has to stop. Like, this is ridiculous. People are living on starvation wages. Their ESOP, which is their retirement, just took a massive hit in the pandemic, and they're going to they send out an ESOP letter in 2022 that they're going to give $4 million to a building in the Cal State Fullerton campus, and it's going to house the Werner Earhardt Center for Leadership Development. It's going to be a library. They can't call it a library because that's against the rules, but it's basically a library of all of Werner's ideas. Anyway.
No, it's typical for these guys. I mean, Hubbard was the same way. It's all about legacy. It's all about being remembered. It's about gaining a level or aspect of immortality. Yeah. Everybody's going to know my name.
Yeah. And for Mike, who was he'd already hit the tops in his field. He was kind of over his ego part of his life. He was very humble by the time I met him. I talked to enough people who knew him when he was younger and said that wasn't true when he was younger. The time I met him, which was in his 70s, he was kind of like past all that. He'd had the success, and he, was with a woman he loved and was happy to just, be in retirement and bat around ideas. But he wanted to see the ontological approach to leadership kind of landed in the academy so that the academy would do what it does, which is study it, take it apart, because he was really impacted. And his daughter, did the forum, repaired their relationship. He went and did it. He was very impacted by it. And he used to tell this great story. He said, at Harvard, we would put all these business, people through these ethics programs, but they never came out being ethical. So, if we could add this ontological element that left people with the being of that, not just knowledge of how to and what not to do kind of thing, he was fascinated with that. And he wanted to see, like, his dream was that there would be schools of ontological study in academia.
Right.
Same with
sort of, he was looking to make it a transformative experience.
That's how you would say it in the landmark world. Like, transformative. You're not, how you see yourself isn't just, like, hey, I'm this, tall woman that, what all those identifiers, but that you could actually, that's at the heart of Landmark's work, that you can invent who you're being, and by who you're being, that impacts the kinds of actions that are available to you, blah, blah, blah. It's a whole like superpower in their work.
Right. Except there seems to be, within the guidelines and strictures of how this culture works, there has to be very tightly controlled rails as to who you are allowed to be.
Well, that's where it gets interesting. See, that's where I think the ego thing takes over, right? So when I was talking earlier about as you get through the leader bodies, and if you study it and you learn the history, which nobody who's in the landmark learns the history. I did not know. I got introduced to the book Outrageous Betrayal by a reporter who called me and had questions about another guru-y client I had actually, who was suing me. Anyway, Werner's not my only guru, guru client. By 2019, I was like so over gurus, I can't even tell you. But he told me about that book, and I was just stunned because I used to always search, Werner Earhardt, and I never had run into it. And there's a whole team of people. I understand. I think this is true in Scientology also, but there's a whole team of people that are constantly scouring the internet and having things taken down.
Oh yeah.
Or buried behind SEO or whatever.
That's right.
It took me 4 months to read the books. It was so upsetting. And it was upsetting because it was familiar. All the things that were being told were very familiar. But this whole thing, and it's in his younger years, he was very blatant. Werner was very blatant that, being a forum leader meant being Werner Earhardt, the being of Werner Earhardt.
That's what I'm talking about. That right there. Yep.
It still is.
Yep.
When they got in trouble in the pandemic, they really leaned back. They brought Werner back in. He never really left. That's the other big lie. He's always been involved. So that, there's now, it's not just a mere sighting popping in here and there. He's always been consulting at the highest levels. Yep. I think he likes to leave for a while and come back. He went and created a whole other Landmark style organization in Japan, which Landmark then later bought. All of Werner's things are now under the auspices of Landmark. Werner's 88 years old. He had a near-death run-in apparently at the beginning of this year, but I haven't heard yet that he's passed. So as far as I know, he's hanging on. And but the whole thing, and it lays out really clear there in the early days because it was blatant. Who you are becoming is Werner Earhardt.
Yep.
The being of Werner Earhardt.
Exactly. And
that's not a viable business product, right? So it gets covered up, changed, and obfuscated, but it's still very much alive.
Exactly. And that's the hidden truth at the bottom of so many of these groups that we identify with a label of cult. And it's just a word. It's a word that comes from culture. It's reflective of a lot of different ideas. It's a very loaded word for some people. It's not for me. I understand it as a very specific set of characteristics of a group. And we find this commonality again and again and again and again, from Keith Raniere to Jim Jones to L. Ron Hubbard to Werner, of I've got this path to enlightenment, but really what enlightenment really means is that you're me, because I'm the enlightened one and you're not, and you got to become me for you to be fully realized as you. And if that isn't the biggest double bind, and double binds are a psychological construct that I very, very much am behind, because it's an explanation for a mechanism of creating insanity in a person, is you create this double bind in their mind where one thing is true, but this other thing that is mutually exclusive to it is also true.
Yeah.
And these two things can't both be true. You can't be a fully realized, actualized self by becoming somebody else. And that seems to be one of the foundational things that makes a cult a cult. And we always drill down through the loaded language and drill down through the control processes and the sales jobs to that basic bottom line truth that seems to underlie all of these things. In NXIVM, you want to be Keith. In Scientology, and I'm going to ask you, in Scientology, there was this constant refrain. What would Ron do? When faced with a problem or situation, what would Ron do? Not what should you do, not what you should do to apply Scientology to this. It's what would Ron do about this? That's what you should do. I'm curious, was that reflected at all in the culture of, I know Werner wasn't there all the time, but was there any kind of principle like that?
I would say only sort of culturally from the old time Estes. So when I went to work in the wisdom area, most of my colleagues had been around in the Estes. And I used to joke, I talked about in the book, I would sit around, we'd have these social events and everybody would tell out their Werner stories, with all this stuff. So it was like a lore, like a ghost story, right?
Yeah.
So because when I came in, he was gone. He didn't have anything to do with the organization. He wasn't involved. We had a whole packet of what we were supposed to say if people asked questions about Werner, and all this stuff. And it was he was literally erased from the Landmark lexicon, except I believe at the highest levels, which and of course you would kind of think, oh well, that's his brother and sister, so maybe they have Thanksgiving or something once in a while,
right? Which
I've now, I've been close enough to the family to see it's very weird. There's something very wrong in that family. But one of his daughters attended the Being a Leader course one time, and I was really stunned when she came back to me and she said, would it be possible? Would you help me? Would it be possible for me to spend some time with my dad while I'm here? Can you make that request for me? And I remember thinking to myself, I'm like, don't you have his cell number? Like, I have his cell number. What do you mean? You just send him. Like, it was very strange. And as I've read his history, though, it makes more sense. He keeps quite a buffer distance between him and everybody else. Now, partially, I had a whole interaction with him where he flipped out and was screaming in my face, and not just to me, but everybody who was in it's called the prep room, where we were doing all the work of designing the course and so on. It was kind of the inner sanctum. And he freaked out and screamed at us all about, we didn't know what it was like to have people take your whole life and to ruin your reputation and da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And that was the first time I saw what I now understand to be kind of a paranoia. And And it wasn't, I mean, that had happened to him. So it wasn't like it was hard to understand that upset. At the time, I thought, oh, Werner Earhardt, the source of all of it, he has rackets too, which is a distinction in the Landmark Forum. So you have a persistent complaint with a fixed way of being, and it has these costs and these payoffs. And so I was like, oh, okay, well, he's human, you know? I even said to him one time, I said, he was actually talking, it's creepy now looking back, he was sort of talking about he needed to invent a new personality because we were doing all this work in these academic settings and he wasn't quite fitting in. Academic, pretty turned off. And yet we were trying to get this course into academia. And at the time, I'm like, oh, self-expression, all ways of being and acting are available to you. He's going to invent himself as a new way of being. I didn't see that as dangerous. I saw that as possibility. Now I see it as really dangerous. And I'm like, oh, that's sociopathy.
A little bit. Yeah. It's, and
he's got a huge buffer between him and everything else. Everything is done through his kind of agents and his apparatus. No money, like you will not, even there's some legal actions that are in progress, and they got Werner off, taken out of the legal actions. And it's just with there's two shell companies that pay for all of his everything, including his staff.
Right.
And here's the joke on them, because if he passes away, the legal actions can continue because the corporations are still there.
Yeah.
So, So anyway, I probably shouldn't tell that secret. That was one of my oh, aren't you funny? So, but there's all this distance. So you wouldn't, I think only at the very highest levels, like if you're a Harry Rosenberg or Joan Rosenberg or something, you might be like, what would Werner do? Kind of thing. But that kind of, even when I was hosting Werner, somebody stood up and said, oh, you basically made the comment, which has been made about him many times, are you Jesus Christ? Like, are you like Jesus Christ? Now he answers in Outrageous Betrayal, that question comes up and he basically says, I quote it in my book. It's one of the later chapters, but he basically says, no, I am who made him. He's like, no, I'm God. But now when I heard that question be posed to him, he was much more humble. My girlfriend was hilarious. She goes, well, he probably figured out that they crucified Jesus. So he should have been before, but he's shrewd. He's shrewd. And I think he's, honestly, to a certain extent, he may even be unaware. I mean, I think what I reveal in the book is that what happens in 2020 after hosting him for 9 years and this whole project and raising $2 million and for them and all this stuff. But some of his staff start coming to me asking for help because he's physically abusive. So that's kind of the straight talk. It doesn't come exactly that straight. They're like, come with questions like, is there any circumstances in which it's acceptable for an employer to choke a employee? I'm like, no. No. That's kind of the stuff that you call the police for.
Mm-hmm.
And so somebody brought these concerns, and it was about their partner who was on staff who was being physically harmed. And I would later find out I was the only person. They brought their concern. Different people at different times through history would bring their concerns. In Landmark, there's a thing, bring it to somebody who can do something about it, which always meant somebody in the organization.
Right.
It literally was just 2 weeks ago, my husband were talking about this, and my husband, who was in New York, he said, wait, why did we never think of somebody who could do something about it as an attorney or the police or a therapist or, some kind of social service? Or we never thought of that. You always went to the manager in the organization. Everything had to stay in the organization.
That's right. Cultural rules, right? It's those cultural binds. You would never, ever call the police on another Scientologist.
Well, and for us, you wouldn't do that because you could cost the work. So we called it the work mostly, not the tech. Sometimes it was the tech, but mostly it was the work.
Uh-huh.
So if this got out, and it took me almost 3 years to speak up, and I was somebody who recognized it as wrong, which I've now found out a lot of people knew about it, and well, you should talk to Werner, or whatever. And but why? Because I was like, well, if I when this comes out, because it wasn't a question for me, I didn't think I was going to be the one to tell. There's some legal actions, and these staff members of his, they spend about 1.5 years internally trying to get it handled, like they could try to get help from Landmark, who's funneling a lot of the employees, people who work for Werner, work on his teams, come through Landmark. So they try to get Landmark, plus it's his brother. So they try to handle it internally. Right. Why are they doing it? Because they don't want to cost the work, this work that's transforming the world. Hundreds of thousands of people, they claim 3.5 million graduates. Their transformation is going to be erased. The forum will cease to exist. There will be no more. The world will come to an end. But you know what? Chris, I believed that. Mm-hmm. I spent 2 years weighing the work and the value I had experienced and witnessed against a handful of people that were being beat up by an old white guy, mm-hmm. abusing his power. Mm-hmm. And I was like supporting these, and I wasn't directly hit. I wasn't directly abused. And then you also have all the threat background. They're incredibly litigious. Everybody in the organization, especially if you made it to any kind of leadership position and left, I don't know one that hasn't gotten a letter of some sort of threat if you say this or do whatever. And so you're like, and then of course you're like, well, I'll just get complete and move on with my life. Well, because of my daughter and coming to learn and understand trauma, I knew there is no getting complete and moving on with your life when you've been physically, verbally assaulted, emotionally, and spiritually abused.
Yep.
That's not a thing.
That's right.
I wish it was, honestly. I really do.
Oh, it'd be great. If you could just get up and walk away and everything would be great. Oh, that'd be wonderful.
I still have people on my Facebook saying, oh, you just got to get complete. I'm like, what makes you think I'm not? Like, this is what complete looks like. I'm not going to tolerate, because to be quiet is to be complicit.
Yep.
So, and as the various legal actions roll and one gets settled and then this one, and I'm waiting. I have different reporters that are calling me. So I know it's out being investigated, and I'm waiting. And in the meantime, I'm getting more calls from Werner staff people, because I kind of am known as a person that they can talk to and who won't dismiss them or, will hear them. And so I'm, and then I don't know what snapped me really. The $4 million to the library, that like really sent me over the edge, because I learned about this in 2020, but my book came out in March of this year. Mm-hmm. So that's 3 years. Mm-hmm. And I kept waiting, and it is still going to come. I mean, in my book, I don't tell any of the detail. I'll let the detail will come out from the people who experienced it. Yeah. What the specific abuse is, but it's physical. It qualifies. I encouraged them at one point. I said, you need to talk to an attorney that does not have a Landmark connection and ask them, what is this? Because what they're convinced of, what they're told, is that that's his training method. That's what we were told. We're told, he has you watch this. If you're going to work in his inner sanctum, he has you watch this Full Metal Jacket video with a Marine sergeant screaming at a guy over a jelly donut.
Yep.
And he calls, and you can find it on the internet. He has a thing he did just a couple of years ago about ruthless compassion. And but what you're told is two things: that the people who get chosen to work for him, which at any given time is going to be 10 to 12, they get chosen. It's a high honor. And they're being trained and developed by him, and that they agree to this treatment. That's what you're told. And what I personally witnessed was a lot of verbal bashing and humiliation, and what I at the time would have called a hostile work environment. In fact, he asked me one time, he says, you should come to work for me. And I'm like, I would never work for you. He said, I'll work alongside you, but I would never work for you. And he said, why? And I said, well, I will never work in the environment you create around you.
You told him that straight up.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I got
gutsy move.
I got in a nose-to-nose screaming match with him in a restaurant once, too. That's why.
Good for you.
Yeah, I was like, but see, I didn't recognize. So he's got the staff. We're housing them, taking care of them for like 3.5 weeks every year, at least, sometimes 2 of those, because I hosted 2 programs in a year. So a couple months out of a year, I'm spending basically embedded with these people. And I could tell I thought they're confronted because he's tough. He's screaming, he's yelling, he's calling them names. It's there's all kinds of nonsensical, like if you could find the longest, hardest route to get anything done and then times it times 10, they do it that way. Insane. And so I was always like, so I was compensating for all that. I was the in-between intermediary person between the real world and that world.
Right.
And that was a lot of my job, right? Was to make it work for him. They would do this course. We'd have 200 to 300 people. He had a group of colleagues that he was working with that are great people. And they were developing this course, and they were developing it by delivering it to graduates. And that was my job, was to host that. And then we had some universities that hosted, and then I liaisoned between universities. So that was kind of the thing. But he would have this just really crazy, volatile environment. And they were, what I now recognize is they were terrified.
Mm-hmm.
That's why they were always so confused.
Mm-hmm.
Because they would do weird things. Like one of them came to me one time, I think 5 or 6 times over the course of 2 days, to ask me where the front door of the hotel was. I'm like, dude, it's like, I said, well, the front faces the beach technically, but the door you come in, it's that main door with the lobby, and I've walked it. I'm like, but he kept coming to me and asking me this question. Well, now later, after some of them come and start telling me what's really going on in that inner suite, that, that work environment, I was like, oh, those are terrorized people.
Yeah.
They can't think.
Yes.
And then he's doing mind weird stuff on them because they're all his little guinea pigs.
Yep.
So he's doing some kind of, but where's the front door? And they maybe come back and they go, well, it's in the back of the building in the center. And he's like, but where's the front door? And for days until they don't even know their name.
Right. Right. I'm really glad that you are talking about this, because this is the kind of insight into the leadership and the mind and the operation of the leadership at these highest inner circle levels that sheds so much light on, a lot of things. One, you mentioned, they're terrorized, they're terrified. In Scientology, it was no different with David Miscavige, the guy who runs the show now. He runs exactly the same show. And his inner circle are punished physically, psychologically, spiritually, not sexually, not that.
Yeah.
That's about the only thing we got, right?
But by the time I met Werner, he's in his late 70s,
right?
Kind of a little at that stage. But yeah, I never, to be clear, never heard any of that.
No.
Here's the thing: since the book came out, Chris, so I know all that. I'm like sitting with that. It's not coming out. It's not coming out. I'm having this whole existential crisis, this thing that I've given 26 years of my life to. I'm learning that I'm not really qualified for anything else. Because that's the other thing. You're like told, like, you're going to be this like elite, strike force human, that can just outperform anything. But then you get out in the real world and you find out you're actually a weirdo that nobody does fit.
Yeah, I don't know anything about that. Yeah. Uh-huh.
So what do? We sit around and talk about this stuff.
Kinda, Yeah.
So where I've kind of started to channel that energy is I'm very passionate and partnered up with the Seek Safely organization and very passionate about what it looks like to create a safer and more ethical self-development space.
Yes.
That's where I'm putting my forward energies. But this stuff, and I went to write a book about that, and it was my book publisher that actually said, well, you got to tell your story. I said, what story? She says, you got to tell, why are you so passionate about that? Like, why are you talking about that?
Yep.
And I said, I can't tell that story. That's going to get me killed or sued. Like, I can't tell. I mean, I had already made the decision that I would comment when the people who were directly being harmed by him actually get their story out, that I would back them up. But I wasn't going to be the one to tell. Right. It was really my book publisher that convinced me and held my hand to tell the story. She said, the world needs to know this story. And she'd had a bad experience with a group as well. So, right. But since then, it was very deliberate how we published the book. We did a private launch at 4:00 on a Thursday. I hit at 4:00 on that Friday, I hit a public post on my Facebook, which is when I knew the Landmark people would find out because it's all that. And we figured we'd have at least 3 days before they could get an injunction. That was the plan. So in that 3 days, 600 people download the book, and it's almost all Landmark people. And rather, as far as I know, right? And I did Seek Safely did the launch with me, so they're promoting it to folks that follow Seek Safely, and by then I'd made friends with Sarah and Nippy over at A Little Bit Culty, and we'd recorded some podcasts, and those were going to come out over the next. We had a whole strategy, but the strategy was like, let's tell what's going on, and it's in the lightest, kindest fashion that we could, because I was going through it myself. And what happened was I was completely flooded for weeks with hundreds of people saying, me too. And what I now know is that the very culture, you nailed it earlier, the very culture that I thought was just around Werner actually is deeply, deeply, deeply entrenched in the organization as a whole. And in part because his sister, Joan Rosenberg, who runs the centers, the most abuse is in the center's operations and in the seminar leader program. The forum leaders have no idea what's happened to them, really.
Right.
Like the ones who are active. The ones who have gotten out kind of know, but they're mostly trying to go on with their lives.
Yeah. Some
of them have gotten the therapy that they need and whatnot, but mostly they're trying to go on with their lives and continue to make some kind of contributing difference.
And this is why it's so important that you use the word cult in your book, by the way, because people don't connect those dots.
No.
This is a problem. This is a huge problem in the multi-level marketing world as well. The victims don't connect the dots. They think that they are a personal failure because of the indoctrination that is piled on them, just like with Forum, where if it doesn't work, it's you. It's always you who is at fault for being abused. It's you who are at fault for not getting the work done, for failing, right?
You failed to sufficiently be staff member.
Yes.
You failed to sufficiently be forum leader. And how we know that is because somewhere your results weren't right. Occasionally, Landmark does have, I now know through, thank God for Rick Ross's Cult Education Institute site, look up the L, go the alphabetical thing and hit L. And he has a database of, countless lawsuits. And there's a bunch he doesn't have on there. We've found a bunch. Because now all these people are like, wait, what? And now they're looking and they're talking to each other.
Good.
And it's good. They're in the early stages. I mean, really early stages of kind of really starting to realize and understand and connect those dots. And one of the things I wanted to draw that line between Werner and the organization. And then I didn't realize that the line is much thicker than even I knew. And so now, just the staff members whose lives have been utterly devastated by surviving being on staff, living on nothing wages, being so beaten down, it's absolutely heartbreaking. And it's why I'm talking even louder and even more, because now it's not just about those 10 or 12 people that were being harmed by Werner. And then the hundreds that came before them in the 40 years. It's now literally hundreds and hundreds of Landmark staff and program leaders who have, and there's a lot of graduates out there who've gotten value from the work, and they're kind of like, but the work is so good. And I'm like, yeah, but at what cost?
That's right. That's right. Because this is where you have to separate things, because this is so word for word in the ex-Scientology world, in the ex-MLM world, in the ex-Mormon world. And there are so many of these things where, even there are still NXIVM advocates. I mean, this is a thing where, because people have experiences and they don't really, and until you go deep and study this stuff, you can't expect people to understand this. But because they don't understand what happened to them actually in that 3-day seminar, in those workshops and forums, they don't really, they've got it worked out that it's, that it was explained to them that this is what's happening to you and this is why. But that's all bullshit. None of that's actually true. It's what's being done to you is
enough truth in it so that it lands. Like,
well, little things like you can do something about. Yeah, you can do something about your life. Okay, great. Go clean your room. Great. I have found. I don't know. I mean, I'm just spouting off here, but one of the most powerful gateways to self-improvement or to doing something about your life is the simple, such simple concept that you got to get across to so many people. And it's really surprising how many people you have to get this across to, that something can be done about it, that you can actually step into the driver's seat, grab the reins of your life and do something about it, because so many people feel buffeted about by the, oceans of chaos of our lives that they don't feel that they're in the driver's seat at all. And somebody comes along, some guru guy, and goes, no, you can. And that's great. But then they pile all this other crap on top of it, like you're ultimately responsible for every single thing that ever happened to anybody anywhere. And at first you go, well, that's really empowering. I feel so powerful, until you try to use it.
In the world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And they have that experience and they don't understand the neuroscience of it, the psychology of it, the sociology of it. They don't understand influence, like Robert Cialdini breaks down in his book on influence.
That book is good.
It's wonderful, right? And you read it and talk about transformative. You start seeing the world in a really different light once you realize, about the 9 different ways that people are influenced by things. And it all becomes super, super clear that you had all the power all along. And these people just they suck it out of you. They're like vampiric.
Yeah.
And that's what these people who run these things are, because they're all about the money, power, and influence. They're not about giving the work away, doing good social work, being a charity. I'll tell you, one thing Scientology is not. It's not a charity. And right. And yet they use all the language and the sort of strictures and structures of charities or nonprofits or humanitarian goals. And they use all this flowery language, and people sort of get fooled by that into thinking that's what it really is. And you gotta do what we've done, where you gotta go, you get burned hard enough and you step out of it, and then you get curious. And you go, wait a minute, what the hell just happened to me?
Right.
And that's the process you're going through right now. It's a process I've been going through, And
I think there's some other failures in our society that aid this whole thing.
Oh, sure.
One, I think the commodification, the way intellectual property is owned, and, it's like the drug companies who put that slightly different brand, so patent so they can sell it, la, la, la. But then these, I'm about to lead a workshop called the Safe Practitioner Workshop. I'm doing in partnership with Seek Safely. And, we're inviting coaches and practitioners to come on and, using the structure of this Seek Safely promise, explore, well, wait, what is it to actually be a safe and ethical practitioner? And they're not going to like a lot of the answers. Don't be a panacea. Like, you cannot be everything to everybody for one low cost of $5.95. I have spent tens of thousands of dollars on my daughter's healing, tens of thousands. And it is going to be a lifelong journey for her to learn to live with complex PTSD, to recover herself, to develop where she didn't develop because she was stuck in that trauma. And, that takes professionals that are trained in those things. That's one of my biggest things with Landmark. Like, I could tell Landmark how to do it brilliantly, because they actually do have a decent course, but stop promising stuff that you don't deliver.
Mm-hmm.
Promise, hey, you're going to come do this course. We bring something that you're at work on in your life. You're going to see some new openings. You're going to see them from a different perspective. And, it's going to be kind of a big experience. Somebody told me recently that even Insight recommends you don't make any life decisions for 2 weeks, which would be very smart in an LGAT format. Like, you're going to see a lot of stuff. Let it settle.
That's right.
Come back when you got something else to work on, that you want to see from a new perspective. The forum's great. It's not, I don't buy my one pair of jeans from Nordstrom's ever for the rest of my life. I go back every couple years for a new pair. So this whole thing that you're going to be everything to everybody all at once. The way my inbox has probably got 6 invitations right now from somebody who's going to teach me how to fill my coaching funnel, how to sell programs, by accessing people's pain, promising the result.
Yep.
There's a whole system and industry that's feeding into this. Our healthcare system that's woefully underfunded, under-resourced, underappreciated. I love Dr. Glenn Doyle of Seek Safely, who's a trauma specialist, and he's the head of the, I don't know, I can't ever remember, but anyway, he's on the Seek Safely dude, along with the Browns, Ginny and Jean Brown, who started that organization. But he's a trauma specialist, and he's got a lot of really great things to say about, if you do something like the forum, a lot of therapists send their patients and then they do the work in therapy. They use the forum as kind of an opener because it does open up insight. But then you got to do the work, and you got to do the work. If you're dealing with addiction, you need to work with addiction specialists.
Mm-hmm.
You don't work with,
untrained, unlicensed, unregulated therapists or thought leaders.
I mean, I figured out that I'd been leading basically cognitive behavioral therapy for 10 years. Like, I was like, what? And I had a lot of landmark training, but I didn't have the kind of formal training that tells me about the dangers and the pitfalls. If you were to ask a landmark forum leader, are you leading an LGAT? They'd go, oh, no. This isn't an LGAT. This is something else. This is something unique.
Yep.
No, Mr. Forum, Mr. and Mrs. Forum leader, I hate to tell you, but you are leading an LGAT, and you're leading one that's kind of been cleaned up a bit. It's safer than some other ones that are out there because I think especially since they've gone online, some of the more dangerous aspects of LGATs, I think, aren't quite as available to them. But they still have the, setting the leader up as the top person, creating that distance. There's a bunch of aspects in there that are exactly like you said. They're like changing your brain.
Well, exactly. And they're setting up, and the thing that is the most insidious thing about this, and really for me, the most bottom line, even lower, the lowest line of the abuse is beyond the physical beatings or financial rapaciousness or the years of
verbal assault.
Yeah, the verbal assaults. There's an underlying thing to this, which is the most awful of this, and that is that it's really setting you up to model your life in a codependent fashion. You have to have this in your life, and that's not independent thinking, critical thinking, or emotional intelligence that is developed inside you so you can go be an independent thinker and live a life that you're in charge of. They're making you dependent on the leadership in the group, and your entire life becomes defined by that,
Right. That's why when people say, but Landmark gave me my life. But Landmark said, no, Landmark did not do that. And God bless Brian Regnier, who I trained with in the wisdom area and adore. But one of the things that he did constantly, I got to work with him closely for 10 years. My biggest regret is that before he died, I didn't call. I kept meaning to, and I didn't do it. And then he died. But I'd call him and say, wait a minute. I don't get you in this organization. I just don't get it, because he was constantly busting our egos. He would tell us, there was just a small group of us that are wisdom leaders. And he used to tell, my favorite thing was, we were never responsible for people's transformation. And that if we took credit, we were off. That we were not even the tip of the tail of the dog of transformation. We were the fuzz on the tip of the tail of the dog. That was one of my favorite quotes. And he said, you are merely honored and privileged to be in the presence of people who are transforming themselves through their participation. That is what he taught me. And how that guy lived in that organization, I now do not understand. And, if there is a heaven, one of the first people I'm looking up is Brian Regnier to have that conversation, because I don't get it.
Well, let me ask you about one other concept that I've thrown around a bit in terms of of how these groups operate and how they get people, and is such intense loyalty out of people. Tell me your thoughts about this. I call it, and I'm not unique to this. I'm not the source of this concept, but weaponized empaths.
Oh, wow. I have an empaths, like
Empaths, yes, right? You take people who care. You take people who feel deeply. You take people who actually do connect with other people. And when you're somebody who is choking people out because they're not complying with your orders, that is not an empathic person. And that's not somebody who has your best interests at heart. That is an egotistical, narcissistic monster. And I'm sorry, but I'm just going to say that because when you have...
Abuser.
And certainly abuser.
Domestic abuser.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm not looking at the L. Ron Hubbards or the Keith Ranieris of the world as weaponized empaths. They are the ones who radicalize and weaponize empaths around them. And by doing so, by pulling in people who feel strongly, care deeply, and are compassionate about doing something effective in the world and helping other people for real, they feed them this sort of malignant dogma that it really underneath it all creates codependency and empowers the leader at the cost of the followers. 100% of the time, that's
this that you're talking about. I mean, I can see myself utterly in what you're saying.
That's what I'm talking about, right? Do you see? Yeah.
Absolutely. I can see myself completely in what you're saying, and I can see pretty much the majority of a number, especially the women, other leaders I've known. That's at least how it starts. You get in. I think there's certain people whose I've seen their personality change over the years, but I remember I work with this wonderful teacher now, and we've been working a lot on feminine, masculine, and energy, and just all kinds of. I have a therapist, a spiritual teacher, and a coach, witchy woman teacher, and then an address book full of people like you, and we sit around and have these kind of conversations. So, I love it, and but I remember I was dealing with something in my family, and she just made the statement to me about, I wanted to send this gift off to somebody in my family who's really rejected me in a very, very hurtful and harmful ways. And I'm like, well, I'm just going to send them love. I'm just going to send them love. And I learned that in part in Landmark. I remember my form leader telling a story about a dear friend that got mad at him and wouldn't talk to him, but every year for 20 years, he would send her a birthday card, and that would, because who he was love. So he was going to be love no matter who they were being, kind of thing. So this is totally reinforced. So I'm going to send love. And she says to me, she says, oh, no. She said, they'll use your love against you and them. And I'm like, you can't use love against. How can you possibly use love against a person? I remember this so clear because fast forward like 9 months later, they ended up having this like secret baby that they didn't tell. This is one of my husband's kids. Doesn't tell us, had the whole family not tell us. We were completely alienated out of this major happening in our family with one of our own children.
Wow. And
when I found out, it literally put me on my knees. I mean, it put me on my knees when I found out that this had happened, which is about 4 days after this child was born. And they had lived with us. We had supported them. Like, my whole experience always was just pouring on love. But then how could we be like, what? I couldn't get it. And I remember calling my coach back and I said, I got it. That's how love can be used against you. Because what put me on my knees was that I deeply loved them and I cared for them and I tried to help them, and they have certain issues in their family and we tried to support that and all this kind of stuff. Well, they don't want support. They don't want our help. They don't want any of that. So they cut us out. And that we love them. So, but that was a really pivotal moment for me because it had me start investigating, I think, what you're talking about right there. And then, all that happens while I'm deconstructing this Landmark stuff. And I start to realize that my genuine passion for leaving the world a better place was completely used to exploit me.
Exactly. That's
absolutely.
Yep.
But it also made me a good leader. It made me an excellent. Why are all these people coming and talking to me and telling me their secrets?
That's right. That's right. See, these operations run on the shoulders of people like us.
That's right.
And the leader only pulls it off as long as they can keep fooling everybody as to what they're really about. And as long as we, as these weaponized empaths, right, these people who will literally die for a cause, he ain't going to die for the cause. No. He's gonna go to a non-extradition country, right? That's where he's going to go.
He's sucking down millions of dollars.
Right.
Literally, they have staff members living in San Francisco on $12.
Exactly. And as Sea Org members, we were making $50 a week. Right? It's a no money operation. The Church of Scientology, all the money is at the top. And it's slave wages, and people in the local churches at the city level are making nothing, and they're signing contracts, legally binding contracts of 2.5 or 5 year commitment. I'm going to be a religious volunteer. I'm not going to make any money here. I'm not owed a thing, and I will give 100% of my. Yeah. This is how they have staff members all over the world, as they sign these contracts of voluntary religious commitment.
I bet that's where Werner saw it, right? Because
probably.
I was like, oh my, Sarah and Nippy and I were talking one time, you know, and I'm like, hey, at least you got a commission. Like, because at that time, up until you got to the former advanced course leading level, it was all volunteer. Mm-hmm. So, and then you could go on staff, but staff, you were paid, they said it was a teacher salary, but it was literally, I mean, there was, Brian Nord tells a story about being the receptionist, his first staff job at 20 years old. He's the receptionist in New York, and he's making $18,000 a year. And, you know, but here's the worst part. And then you're told all the time, it's not like your sacrifice isn't acknowledged. Mm-hmm. It's acknowledged. Mm-hmm. You are sacrificing for the work.
That's right. That's right.
You, that the forum could be made available for, I don't even know what it is now, $595 or $525. Because of you, we can keep the price. That we were told that the centers division was designed to come in at even. Mm-hmm. What we didn't know is even included millions of dollars for Werner.
Right.
But
exactly.
Come in at even. And that's why we were sacrificing. And later, some of his staff told me about, we would be at these 5-star resorts. And one of the things my team did was hoard food for his staff, because we saw they weren't eating. Well, they weren't eating because I would later find out they were only allowed to file expense for what they would have spent were they eating at home.
Wow. I mean, that's what I'm talking about. Empaths will put up with that. Well, it is abuse. Of course it's abuse, but because we martyr ourselves for a cause, right, we'll put up with it because we believe in a higher purpose. We believe we're saving the world. I believed it. I was 100% committed, right? So were you. Yeah. We thought we were doing this when in fact we were doing this. And the mental picture that I got when I went all the way down the rabbit hole 10 years ago, just like you've done or are doing with this, was
4 years.
I saw the picture of me as a pawn on a chessboard.
Wow. Yeah.
That was my position for 27 years of my life. And I thought I was the king. I thought I was the rook. I thought I was a power player making change. And I wasn't. I was just this pawn being moved around.
I was special.
Yeah.
I thought I had family. You know, my family of origin was a bit messy. So I had family. I had community. My commitment it was a place where a girl who was a teen mom who had to drop out of school and couldn't get an education could do this job. And some of that was true. Yes, I did get to travel the world. Yes, I have stayed in 5-star resorts and amazing suites and had incredible experiences. And I have done all those things through this. That is true. I've done them enough to know that it wasn't worth it. It was not worth what it cost my daughter. It was not worth what I missed with my son.
Yeah.
It was not, and I don't hold it like a regret. You know, that would be like saying, do I regret having my son at 15 years old? Well, yeah, kind of. Like, I mean, if I had to do it again, I wouldn't do it that way. And I have a fabulous son we grew up together. We did a great job. You know, I don't regret it in that way.
Right.
But that doesn't mean I don't see that wasn't the most healthy choice I could have made, you know. Right. And that's kind of how I view my Landmark career. And we do actually have the mental ability to hold both things. Mm-hmm. This is one of my big men. We can hold the value that we created for ourselves, that we got. That's my only insistence, is claim it for yourself. Stop giving the credit to the organization or the work or whatever.
That's right.
We can hold that value that we created and we can appreciate it and we can love it and we can use it. And we got those tools and they're ours forever and all that kind of stuff. And these sons of you-know-whats used the hell out of us, exploited us like crazy. Rick Ross keeps going, where's the money? Where's the money? And I'm like, well, you can look up Harry's salary is actually low for a CEO salary. Because you know what? The money's going to Werner. That's where the money is.
Yep.
And there's a certain amount of money being reinvested or whatever, so they could expand. Why? So they can be world domination.
That's right.
We haven't even talked about this part, but the other thing that started to wake things up for me was when Black Lives Matter hit. And I started to really learn about racism and colonialism and da-da-da. And I started to see similarities between colonialism and this kind of I have the answer for the world mentality.
Sure.
I'm going to save you. I'm going to, I have the answer for you. Right. And I've really, I think that's probably saved me from my, what'd you call it? Something empath?
Being a weaponized empath.
A weaponized empath is now realizing whatever I'm picking up through my empathy and my empathicness is great for me. And it is not the answer for the world.
That's right. No, we're all individual that way. And we can be manipulated and used, and that's not always clear in the moment, especially when it aligns with, or we perceive that it aligns to our emotional needs. What do we need, right? What offers us fulfillment in our life? Oh, well, here's the guru to give it all to you. Oh, wow. Here it is. Here's the whole package. I don't need to do any, I just need to make it happen and get it out to other people. And I've dedicated decades of my life to that, only to find out, hey, guess what? It was not true.
I think it's important what you said earlier too about, because we are at a place in our society where the gurus kind of go in the background to an extent. So Werner's managed in Landmark, in my view, in my study, and what I'm now hearing now, his identity is fully implanted and exercised through that organization.
Yep.
Most of the people, they just started bringing him back. They did a weird thing during the pandemic. Werner got back involved like heavily in the daily operations, probably because he needed money and that he would make money doing that. But that's my cynical opinion.
No, that's probably right.
So, well, plus it's like, he's the Lord of the Manor, right? So that, it feels good. And, but so they did start, like, now there's only a few centers left. They've shut them all down. They're going to an online thing. But for a while there, for about 2 years, like 2021, 2022, they would do a 5-minute spiel in the programs acknowledging Werner as source, which, given they had just spent 20 years trying to erase this guy, it's kind of like, that's weird. Except for if he's in there working with them, he's without ever saying it. I've seen this. I've sat at tables with him and seen this happen without ever saying it. Instead, being the benevolent leader. Oh, wow. Oh, that's fabulous. You would do that. You know what I mean? Like, he would never, I don't know how to quite describe that, where you just sort of know. You hear Michael Cohen talking about this with the Trump thing. Like, he didn't have to say, do this. You knew you have to do that.
Yep.
There's no, I knew we never could say no to Werner, whatever Werner wanted, which always came through somebody else, one of his aides or whatever. I got very, very good at saying yes and. Oh, yes, we can, dig up. We had a whole thing with showers. He needed a certain length of showers. And my husband ends up working with this hotel, this Ritz-Carlton. Why I hosted at 5-star properties had nothing to do with the status for me. It was because they knew how to deal with high demand people. They have a very high integrity kind of service. So that's why I hosted at Ritz's. But this particular one, so he's not getting the length of shower he needs. We have him in a little bungalow because by this time I know I have to keep him sort of separated so people can't hear, because we would hear all this crashing and banging and screaming and yelling in his suite. So I had to keep him sort of separated. And, and then my husband gets together with the manager of this Ritz-Carlton, and they decide to dig up the cooler in Dubai. This was it was in Abu Dhabi. And there they don't have water heaters. They have water coolers because you got to cool the water down.
Mm-hmm.
It's hot there.
Mm-hmm.
So they dig up the water cooler tank from beside his bungalow, put in one with a larger capacity so that he can take longer showers.
Wow.
And, and it feels pretty good to my husband and I, because we're like the heroes. It's a problem. We figure it out. And that's a kind of a game. You get into the game of it. Like, wasn't even paying attention to whether what he wanted or needed seemed a little outlandish or seemed a little over the top, especially given it was this charitable thing we were raising money for and da 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 da. But no, Werner needs what he needs. He's older. He's the guru. He's the source.
Yep.
So get him what he needs, because then you'll get the performance. That was kind of how I took it. But now that's seeped in. It's embedded in this whole organization.
Yep.
So my husband visited the Seattle office. It's about to close, but one of the things that stood out, there was a big Werner quote on the wall. So they brought him back in, but you don't need him anymore. People adhere to the ideology. They adhere to the work. They adhere to we're changing the world.
Right.
They don't need to know about the person to be addicted, to be used. And which is why I think, as this information about him comes out, a lot of people will kind of go, yeah, but the work was good. Oh, okay, I got it. So he's abusive. Wow.
Yeah, it's very unfortunate that people can't connect the dots on those things, because they don't understand that because they have a good experience, that there aren't, all kinds of landmines planted in there to screw them over. When they try to carry this off to, the next level or whatever. It's why we desperately need not only critical thinking education, which is really something that is being worked on in a lot of places, but it's not just about critical thinking. It's about emotional intelligence. It's about understanding what your needs are that dominate and drive your behavior. Because if you don't get that, then so many nonsensical explanations can be given to you, like you have a reactive mind, and that's the problem, right? No, you don't. You don't have anything like that. But it sounds good, and it sounds like an explanation that makes logical sense. Therefore, it works. Therefore, I'm good. Therefore, what's the problem? The problem is it's a control mechanism designed to limit your thinking so you won't look for the real answers. That's the problem. And then you're going to run into all kinds of problems in your life with your family, with your friends, with your work associates, trying to use this stuff that really doesn't make sense, but but I thought it did. No, it doesn't. That's
the weekend.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
A bunch of other people doing that. It totally worked. And so shared, and a few, things happened. I love Brian Nord, who's telling his story very publicly, so I named him, but he's talking about, he was a young gay man, and when he came out to his family, it didn't go well, and there was a big rift. And then he goes in and does the forum, and he gets this thing. One of the main things they talk about in the forum, you can read it on their syllabus on their website. So Harry, if you're listening and you think I'm stealing it, it's on your website. So the whole, they have this whole uncollapsing the vicious circle. Something happens, you make it mean something. It comes from a Nietzsche idea from 100 years ago. But, whatever happens, we have an immediate assessment or interpretation of that. Okay, that's all right, great. So Brian's in this program and he sees, I had an interpretation of the way my dad responded. And I decided that he was rejecting me and that I, blah, blah, whatever he decided.
Yep.
So he goes to his family and he says, hey, I'm doing this course and I saw this thing. And is that really what you meant? And they're like, no, of course not. We love you, blah, blah, blah. And in his experience, his family comes back. The guy gets his family back.
Right.
He could have had that same thing in therapy.
Yep.
He could have read some Nietzsche.
Right.
He could have had Scientology.
That's right.
He could have had an experience in Catholic Church. There's like so many places, right?
That's right.
For him and Landmark. So then it becomes, okay, Landmark saved my life. So he becomes a devotee, and he just gobbles it up. And since, for the next 26 years, he's a Landmark, he calls himself a super fan. And,
Exactly.
And now, he left the spaceship and he's trying to figure out, wait, what happened? And I don't fit. And my nervous system is like crazed. And,
Yep.
But most of all, I don't have an opportunity to make a difference. I'm not changing lives anymore, on a daily basis by, calling and registering people in programs or whatever. So it's just a whole system that sets you up. I'm curious, in Scientology, what did they do with emotions? So in Landmark, what your whole emotional thing, you bracket that. So your emotions they refer to it as what's going on with you internally, is what there is to be set aside. So does this not sound like sociopathy training or what?
Yeah.
Like the narcissist and the sociopathy, which I now sort of have some suspicions about. Werner may have that neurotype. But the ideal is to not be impacted by what's going on with you internally, AKA your emotions, your feelings, like that. And to be able to use your rational reasoned mind, right? Your conscious mind, that 2% that's functioning there. And, essentially reason your way out of it in some way. Now, and their prescription is to invent. This is what I think is funny, because being is very much a presence or emotional kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But they don't make that connection. So what you do then is invent yourself as some other being, but it's a conscious invention. And then you take that on. So you've set aside whatever's going on with you internally. You've created yourself, or you've, another big one on a war against context is decisive. Because they only speak about half a context, which is how you're seeing something. Context is where the external circumstances and how you're experiencing yourself and come together. Where they meet, that creates a context, right, for how you're seeing things. That's what I've read since. But in Landmark, context is all what you're making it mean. So that's the high magic, is you get to set aside all that emotional stuff, create your own being, also known as meaning or context, and then see it all through that.
Well, yeah, I would say there are some definite similarities and parallels in how Scientology trains people to deal with emotionally charged or traumatizing or difficult emotions or situations, or how to think about your emotions at all, actually. And I've done long breakdowns on this, but the summary version is that Hubbard charted emotions on a scale. He assigned numbers to them. He calls it the tone scale. And emotions are analogous to musical tones or vibrations of your spirit. Your spirit is the thing that is experiencing the emotions, not your body or anything else. And that the negative emotions on the scale, because they are not only numbered, but they go into the negatives. And there's a scale for you as a spiritual entity, and there's a scale for you with body plus spirit. Right, body plus Thetan, and so your spirit can
in the quantum physics.
This is out there stuff. Yeah, this is out there stuff.
Epidemic. No, but now, I have teachers talk to me about this stuff in slightly different languages, but I'm just kind of like, holy moly.
Oh, yeah. No, there's a whole book on it. It's called Science of Survival from 1952 or 1951. It was the second book he wrote after Dianetics. And he not only charted out these emotions and put them on a scale and decided to give value judgments to them. There are emotions called below 2.0 on the scale. The scale goes from 40 to minus 40. And so at the very, very, very top is the spiritual, existence of serenity of beingness. And at the bottom of the scale is a spiritual state of total failure. And these emotions are supposed to represent your sort of vibrational state, you could say, as a Thetan. But more to the point, they are viewed as what's called restimulation. They're an effect of past stresses and traumas in your life that are coming back in the here and now to plague you and drive your behavior. You act the way you do now because of the trauma you have and the commands that trauma literally sort of imposes upon your thinking.
That piece is completely supplanted, slightly different language, simplified a bit, but completely supplanted in Landmark. Completing your past. That's what you're doing in the forum, is you're completing the past.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. And so these factors of trauma are what the auditing in Scientology is all about. The therapeutic component of Scientology is dealing with these past stresses and traumas through a kind of regression therapy or reliving it. And there's other forms of auditing. There's lots and lots and lots of different forms. Hubbard had decades to develop this stuff, and there are thousands of processes and procedures to use. But the theory is that you, as a spiritual entity, are going through life running this body that you have, and you're going to have body after body after body. This is not who you really are.
Okay.
And your spiritual essence, or your the thetan that is you, is the thing that goes on from life to life to life. And the thoughts you're thinking and the feelings you're having, that's you as a spiritual entity being impacted by your mind, which has all these pictures from your past that affect you. And most of the stuff that's really heavy charged and is really hitting you upside the head comes from your past lives, not stuff that's happened to you in the here and now. So that's the foundation on which Scientology is built. So if you buy into the spiritual component and you buy into the idea that you are not your body, immediately you can negate all of biology, all of neuroscience, all of medicine, all of psychiatry. None of them know what they're talking about because none of them acknowledge the spirit. And it's the spirit that's really the source of all of this. And so what we're doing in Scientology, they tell you, is they're waking you up as a spiritual entity because you've been walking around for trillennia in this sort of hypnotic daze. And you're just going from life to life to life. So your emotions are really a kind of fake veneer that you're laying on top of all of this as to how you get along with other people and stuff like that.
Totally have eaten this stuff up.
Oh, yeah. I sure did.
I'm actually a little bit grateful now that Werner, those people came to me so that it shook me up enough to have me start questioning, because I would completely, totally have eaten this up. But, and to some extent, I do a fair amount of spiritual study now, but it's more about the integration, right? You're a physical, what is it? You're a physical being having a spiritual
existence. Yeah, right.
But you are a body, and you're more than just your body. Like that would
fair
be
enough.
The sort of spirit, diamond approach kind of stuff is what I appreciate so much about diamond approach is there's so no truthiness in it. It really is just about investigation and study and, and kind of like thinking, and there's no right answers. There's there is a guy who like kind of started it, but you don't really follow him. Like there's no it's very interesting to see some of these things kind of played out through a school. It's a school, the Ridwan school. So It's got that format to it and it's missing all this other weird stuff. So it's interesting that Scientology, he took that piece, and it's almost like Werner took the other piece. He rejected all that. And he says in this book, the 60 Minutes one, she's talking, she does an interview with him, and he's talking at some point about he took these parts of Scientology, but he left all the thetan stuff, which I can now hear because that's spiritual stuff.
That's right. That's exactly right. That's right.
And he took all the reasoning stuff, he took all the like logic stuff, and then he stripped the spirituality, any spiritual connotations out of it because he didn't want to be limited. No matter how big the Catholics are, they still only get all the Catholics. He wanted everybody.
Right. Sure. Exactly. Exactly.
The Christians, they got that, but they don't got them all.
That's right.
Yourself in that way.
Wow. Yeah, I totally get it. Yeah. So there's a whole, sort of mystic thing to that. And you're taught through various procedures, and training drills or regimens that you do to suppress your emotions. And you learn how to basically enter a kind of, these are controversial terms, different ideas about things. I'm just trying to use these words to communicate the concept. You enter a kind of a trance state, you kind of enter this unemotional state. You learn to suppress your emotions. You learn to be at cause over your emotions. Hubbard has a little poem that he wrote called The Joy of Creating, where there's a line in there about, force yourself to smile and you'll soon stop frowning. Force yourself to laugh and you'll soon find something to laugh about. A being causes his own feelings. The greatest joy there is in life is creating. Splurge on it, right? And this little poem is used throughout Scientology to, you're the one creating your emotions. And that's the lie, because you're not. That's not how emotions work at all. And I've spent a lot of time studying this. So it's all backwards world. And that's what these gurus do, is they give you a false solution to a real problem. And because a certain percentage of people can buy into these solutions and have it work on them, they become convinced that this is a dogmatic truth that they must cling to, rather than an experience that they had. And they can't quite separate these things. That's how I see it.
I can completely concur with that, and with what I've been studying and learning and whatnot as well. Like it's really right on, because and there's a lot of shortcutting. There's a lot of, like, who doesn't want to be told that you don't have to feel those icky feelings?
Exactly. That's right.
You mean, wait, I can solve my problems without having to go through the mess. The other thing I think that's really getting us, and that I'm seeing a lot, is how we. So I say, and I kind of point to this in the end of my book. Actually, my book and my interviews are starting to blend, but because I've seen so much since the book was published,
mm-hmm.
and but we are always looking to outsource our responsibility and our answers. Like, I want to outsource my power somehow. Like,
right.
if I believe this thing, then I'll have strength. But it's an external seeking. This is one of the things my coach and I were talking about the other day, is this sort of like, gosh, where does it all go wrong? Right. Because there's always this grain of kind of human truth, I think, in a lot of these ideas, but then it gets so twisted and wrong. And she was making the point that, well, because we're looking for the money and power and influence have been turned into the power source, and it's all external rather than internal.
Yeah.
So all these all these things, all these teachings that teach us to go external rather than internal, I think are a real problem.
Yeah, I think that's a great point.
Real problem. And it, all the way, I grew up Christian, and I actually had a good experience. I was sharing with you a little before the show started, but I had a relatively good experience in the non-denominational Christian church. But you know why? Because I learned somewhere in some Sunday school class when I was very little that Jesus lives in me. That Jesus is in me. Jesus made me in his image. I'm Jesus. Jesus is me. And I had this very profound experience when I was little of being like totally, enveloped in light. And I was like, oh, I say, really, Jesus loves me. That was my whole thing. And now I think, I'm not so sure about Jesus. I mean, I think there's I don't know. Is there a higher force or a greater power? I don't know. Will I find out someday? Probably, or probably not. I don't know. I don't think I really need to worry about that.
That's
right.
Now
I'm just worried about my dog pee on the carpet.
Exactly. So I have some more worldly problems to deal with right now.
Like some things to deal with right here, right now. I don't need to so much be worried about that. So,
that's right.
But it's interesting because now I see what's like going on in the Christian church, and it like makes me crazy. I'm like, what are you guys talking about? Like, what that it's in these ideas or these more what, that somehow my okayness is associated with my belief set.
Yes.
Or who I'm following,
yes.
or what I'm of. And I'm just, even when I was little, I didn't quite really have that. And I don't know how that happened, actually. Grew up single mom, didn't have a lot of money, kind of going from church to church and studying people, actually. I was, my grandma used to teach me, because even at 11, I would sit on the park bench and watch people and wonder about them. But
yes. I have gone from, it's been 11 years now, almost 11 years that I've been out. And over this 10 years, 11 years of work, almost daily, trying to sort this stuff out. I went from what the hell happened to me, answering that question. And it took me about 4 or 5 years to figure that out. And once I had that nailed, the next question, which drives me to this day, is why do people act the way they do? What is driving that? What is it? Why do people do that? And I find that question probably doesn't have a single answer, of course. And it's the kind of question that'll just drive me for the rest of my life. And I find it endlessly fascinating, endlessly interesting, and I love talking about it. And so it seems that I've kind of fallen into doing this work and helping people one-on-one as well through consultancy that is sort of channeling all that energy and work I had as a Scientologist and as a Sea Org member to try to save the world. Well, that was never the wrong part of what I was doing. Having that goal or that intention or wanting to help people, there's nothing wrong with that. There never has been. It's when you corrupt that or twist that into something, darker for the greater glory of some dude or some woman somewhere, and there are both, right? That it becomes twisted, and when abuse becomes justified at any level, you're off that path, and we can really fool ourselves as empaths when we get aligned to a cause or a purpose or give ourselves meaning and identity that connects with these psychopaths. And that's and that's where we lose, that's where we fail, and that's where we can have the experiences we're having now, where we go, holy cow, right? So then we try to spend our time helping other people so they don't have to have that happen to them. Right. And that's, as far as I can tell, the most productive way I could spend my life. So that's what I'm doing here. And I think you're on that same path.
I think I am. That's great to hear the kind of stages, because I'm now leading this. There's a whole bunch of people now that are like following and asking me questions. I'm like, I don't know. You start you start looking, and you start learning. Listen to this podcast. Listen to Chris's work. Like I'm like handing out podcasts like candy.
Yep. And exactly.
Books and we're going to start hosting some different events where just people can learn, because to me, knowledge is power, and
big time.
Personal power.
That's right.
Personal power. I don't need to use it on that's one thing that's really shifting for me. I don't, I think I'll spend my whole life being somebody who wants to make a difference, most of all with myself, and, with my children and my like really those that I have been given to share this path with. That's something that I kind of leapfrogged them and went out to the world and sort of left them behind. And that's been a steep lesson. And but I'm also really seeing how much my idea of what makes a difference for you is not necessarily it. Brian taught us, we had a tip we used to teach, which is, in their life, your answer is noise. And
that's smart. That's smart.
So I don't know if I can remember them all. In their life, your answer is noise. And I feel like I'm just even starting to totally understand that. And I've done some work in Haiti and some other, I've been a little bit a part of the Savior class enough to see the damage that does. So I'm really reevaluating that. And I think putting my energy a bit more towards the like learning aspect, and then having those teachings be available. So for whoever needs them or wants them, right, to find them when they find them, rather than being caught, like I'm going to make something happen with people. And, part of that is I was in the consulting, AKA I can totally hear now where it comes from, some of the auditing practices. I was in as close to the spiritual side of Landmark as there is in the wisdom area, just such a different approach. So, our job was to listen. And in our being willing to listen, people would find their own answers. I don't know what the wisdom course is today, but that's what I was taught it was by Brian and the people I worked with. And that was a blessing. Like, I think that primed me very well for what I'm doing now. And some people ask me, what do you think Brian or Margie would say? And I said, I'm pretty sure they're up in heaven cheering me on, honestly.
Awesome.
I'm pretty sure, both of them, those are two of my main teachers. And Werner, I have no idea. I'm sure he's feeling very betrayed, if he even knows. They might be keeping it from him, but in true narcissist fashion, I'm sure he's totally betrayed and
ego bruised. Ego bruised.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's how narcissists.
Part of my little do-gooder heart that does have this, 1/8 of 1 ounce of hope that, maybe I put it in the book. You'll love when you finish the book. You'll love it because I was like, hey, Werner, my dream, go on 60 Minutes and say, we used to have the saying in the Landmark Forum, I have been such a fool. And say, I failed to deal with my, psychological issues. And holy cow, if he owned the whole thing, it would be a shot heard around the world. He would truly die a legend. He would, even if he was lying, I don't care.
If he came clean, that would be amazing. That would be incredibly.
Hunger. He declared the end of hunger when registrations were falling off. He's like, let's get on the end hunger train. And, in the Hunger Project, the organization that got spurned out of that is doing amazing work. He did turn that over and it did completely separate him. And it's doing amazing work in the world now. But in his time, it was about Landmark Forum registrations.
Right. Exactly. All right. Well, listen, we are 2.5 hours into this, and this has been, wow. Yeah. This time has flown by for me here. But I'm going to have to wrap it up. So I'm thinking, this does not have to be the last conversation we have. I am certainly interested in what you keep doing as you move forward here, because you're in a position very, very much like the one I have been in for many years. People writing me all the time, people asking for help about stuff, people wanting to understand more about what happened to them. And you do the best you can. That's all any of us can do. So how do people reach out to you or contact you, and how do people get your book?
So the best is I made a little website, isitoccultbook.com. Mm-hmm. The book is available on Amazon right now. We're working on raising money to put together the Audible. And so it's not yet on Audible, but it is available on Amazon and through Ingram Spark, I guess. But isitoccultbook.com is the way to book. And this podcast will actually get listed on there as well as some of the other ones I've done. But then that also links you off to, there's a little gift on there that'll take you to my little project. Illuminate Life is the name of the website. And we have a vision about creating a marketplace of where practitioners who have committed to the safe and ethical practice of personal development and coaching, health and wellness, because that's a whole other kettle of mess. But people who have taken this Seek Safely promise and really committed to offering that, our idea is to build a marketplace where you can actually find practitioners that are committed to that. So we're looking to build that out in the future. Right now, I'm pretty focused on just, providing opportunities for people to heal, to learn. As much as I kind of want to walk away and leave my 26 years with Landmark behind, I love those people. In a way, that's part of the challenge. Those were amazing people, and so I'm sure we'll continue to find ways to offer opportunities for them to talk to each other. We're looking at hosting a retreat, so all that'll be available through isithisoccultbook.com and the Illuminate site that links to that. So that's probably the best place.
Excellent. Well, I will definitely.
Come back anytime, and if I start a channel, maybe you'll come on. And
sure.
Let's nerd out on this stuff.
Oh, there are so many rabbit holes to go down, and you're a few years into this. There is so much to learn, so much to conjecture about, and there is so much. The ex-cult world, the ex-LGAT world, this recovery world that exists right now, it's the wild, wild west. And there's so much science to do and so much research to do and so much work to be done to help people through the process of coming out of these situations, these coercive situations, and how to deal with it and how to move on from your life and put it behind you, which eventually you want to do,
That's the thing. I'm like, look, we're not going to get rid of all the narcissistic crazy people.
No.
It's just not going to happen.
No.
But we can educate ourselves. We can learn ourselves, because I've already heard from 2 or 3. Yeah, they left Landmark. I heard from one the other day. She worked closely with Werner and this and that. She had read, heard about the book and was this and that. And then all of a sudden she realized that she was going through a breakup, that she was breaking up from her 3rd relationship with a narcissistic person who was based. So the pattern, she wasn't experiencing the pattern in a group anymore.
Yep.
But she was now experiencing it in personal relationships. So
right.
You're just right on. There's so much here for us to learn and disseminate. It's
big time. Big time. It's endless. It really is, because you're really dealing with, some of the most core elements of our personality, of our psychology, if you will, right? Of what drives us when it comes to learning about and recovering from these very, very intensely traumatic experiences, that we've had. Right. You can't help it. You got to dig in deep because this stuff goes deep, and it just isn't any other substitute for it, but learning and growing. So anyway, Anne, thank you very much for taking the time today. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much. I've enjoyed it immensely.
Awesome. Well, I'm very happy. I hope everybody out there who's watching this right now or listening also got something out of this. Always informative, educational, and maybe entertaining. That's the goal here. So with that, on that happy note, I will let you guys go. We will see you next week. Bye-bye.